Hello, and welcome back to episode 10 of Here to Edify. I misspoke last week, so I want to make a correction. I mentioned that you could find the podcast on Apple Music, but of course, we know podcasts are not on Apple Music. They are, in fact, on Apple Podcast. So now that we have that correction out of the way, this week I'm going to have us jump right into the episode. On this episode, I sit down with Miesha Sade to talk about her book, Chameleon. She is unbelievably transparent in both her writings and her poetry. We talk about everything, including one of the works that she initially regretted putting in the book, but later came to realize that nothing we go through is only for ourselves. This is the death of self-sabotage.
Here to edify.
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 I am excited. I feel like I start every conversation with I'm excited, but the reality is I am. To sit down and talk with you. You recently released your poetry book, a book of poetry and prose, Chameleon, and I think that is amazing. I think anyone that is starting off on the author journey, like I can identify with all of the angst and excitement that comes along with that. So I was excited just off the bat of just you publishing a book, but then being able to purchase it and read through it and really see how it is showing a lot of you was like, okay, I need to have this conversation. So I'm really excited to jump right in. I'm going to start with the quote that is on the back of your book, and then I'm going to have us start by you actually reading the piece that you said is kind of the bedrock of the book. So the quote on the back of your book is, "Remember you on purpose when others forget."
Accustomed to change and merging into places that don't quite fit, into backgrounds that aren't familiar with my person, or words that cling to metaphors, then finally, finding refuge in prose. I suppose I'm a chameleon, and some days I can't decide which color I should be.
So I want us to start with, what is the story behind Chameleon?
Okay, the story behind Chameleon, it just goes back to me being a young girl in school, just writing as a means of finding my voice, because I believe that it was silenced. And as you go through Chameleon, you get a sense of that. And so I began to write as a way of, as I said, coping with all the things that were going on around me. And so then just fast forward to high school, I run across a video of two Christian spoken word poets, Ezekiel Ezanwu and Genetics. And when I saw it, I was like, wait a minute, what is this? It was poetry, but in a way that I've never seen it before. And so I wrote my first spoken word piece in high school, but it wasn't until I got to college that I finally decided to share my poetry. I was performing left and right, and I finally had the courage to say, I kind of want to write a book. And that kind of came from people coming up to me, inquiring about it. And after a while, I'm like, okay, there's no such thing as coincidence. At least I don't believe in coincidence. I believe everything is orchestrated by God. And so I'm like, if everyone is inquiring about if I have written a book before or if I do music, let me just give this a shot. But it took 3 years for Chameleon to actually be published. And there's a ton of stories in between and a lot of things that transpired from 2017 until the publish of Chameleon in August of this year.
I love that, and I want to circle back to that in a few. But I want to go to the next question, which is, as you put this book together, what was your hope for your readers?
I would say my hope was for the reader to give themselves permission to feel, to stand firm in their truth, because that's something that I didn't always do up until the last year of becoming the woman that I am today. And to just see me and to see themselves in the pages and have opportunities to reflect. Because even in the midst of my writings, I have like reflection questions at the end of them. So I just wanted to give the reader, even if they're not, a fan of poetry, just to give them a sense of who I am, to give themselves permission to feel and to heal, and understand that healing is not going to be a linear journey. There's going to be, some ups, downs, some crisscross, some dug in, all of that. So that's really what I wanted the reader to receive from Chameleon.
I want to circle back to, because I think it is important. You said it took you 3 years. And a lot of times, whenever we meet someone, it is at their peak. We don't hear about people on the journey usually, and we don't hear about them in the valley, where those are the tough parts, but they make the hill. They make the peak. And so if you had to give us the footnote version of what those 3 years were, from saying, hey, maybe I should do this, but it didn't happen overnight. Yeah. What would that be?
So in the midst of those 3 years, as I kind of touched based on before, a lot transpired. And at the beginning of 2017, I was still grappling with who I was in general. I had no idea of what my identity was. My relationship with Christ wasn't as it is today. So a lot had transpired, and I honestly didn't believe that I was great at writing poetry. So I'm performing a lot. I'm doing a lot of things here and there. People are complimenting and uplifting me. But when I go home, I'm like, I want to stop. I didn't want to write at all. And so I had to unlearn self-hate and relearn how to love myself and look to the word of God for evidence of who I am and who I am not. So I think that is really the root of it.
No, I love that. I just wanted to give voice to the people that are in their 3-year period. I say that figuratively. It can be longer or shorter or whatever. But I wanted to give voice to that because, again, we don't usually talk about those moments.
It took a long time. I even stopped writing for months, too. I was completely convinced that poetry, it was something that I wasn't really gifted with. I probably just convinced myself that, but yeah, it was a long journey, but here we are.
Yes. So next, I want us to jump into this next portion with you reading Sabotage, and we'll go from there.
I have a habit of shying away from things, people, and situations. Growing up, it was due to being labeled as the quiet girl, but that was then. Today, I have an understanding that self-sabotage is not only a bad habit of mine, but it is also my middle name as well. It has become the new norm for me. For instance, I often choose to distance myself from people who show interest, platonic or romantic. I question every compliment and choose to tuck them away. This habit has resulted in me canceling myself out before I give someone else the chance to. I suppose you would call this act of protecting oneself a defense mechanism. However, I tend to protect myself from people who actually want to protect me. I often wonder how I arrived in this position today. How did I allow labels to create havens out of this body and dwell? So many opportunities, connections, and experiences I have robbed myself from. I guess you can say self-sabotage has a way of convincing you that you're unworthy, even while knowing you already are.
So I think this is beautiful, one, because it just speaks to what you just said about just having self-sabotaged for, that 3-year period. But also when I read it, what really rested on me was your line about labels, and them allowing them to make your body a haven. And specifically in this piece, you mentioned the label of the quiet girl. And so I wanted to ask you, what role did this label of your youth play in the making of the Miesha that we meet in Chameleon today?
Yeah, for sure. So ultimately, I had always struggled with my identity because of that label. And it was such a confusing time for me because in school, I was labeled as the quiet girl. But when I'm at home with my sisters and my mom, I am the complete opposite. And so oftentimes my sisters would say, why aren't you the same way you're here? Why aren't you the same way at school, basically? And I don't think they really understood what was transpiring. But I think the quiet girl label especially began to stick whenever I would continuously change from school to school. I was from Georgia, so I was constantly going to one elementary school to the next, and that was just based off of a lot of struggles within our household and, just life stuff, ultimately. And so I allowed that label to just stick with me because it felt comfortable. It felt safe, basically. But ultimately, of course, throughout the years, writing became that safe haven for me, as I mentioned before. And everything that I was feeling, I put it on paper. Even going through, elementary school to middle school, up into high school, even to college. Although I was out here performing spoken word poetry, people still associated that reserved nature about me. But it didn't take until just a year or so for me to understand that it's okay to be, introverted, or to enjoy being by yourself. But I still grappled with, is that what I really enjoy? Or am I still clinging onto that label from so many years ago? And so that's something that I'm still battling with, or, just trying to grapple with, because I do enjoy, being mellow, being, who I am, but still trying to make sure that I'm not clinging onto something that I thought I once healed through. And so in the midst of that, Chameleon came about, of course. In my moments of solitude, I was able to write. And some of these poems in Chameleon are literally 3 years old, 4 years old. But it just goes to show, and it reflects that journey of that quiet girl. And now here I am standing firm in my truth. And I have a voice, and I'm going to use it at this point. I'm going to use it.
Yeah, I appreciate just the fact of still grappling with it and asking the question. I think that is so important. Asking the question of, am I the way I am because people have said this is what you're like, this is what you should be, or because this is truly who I am? And you've kind of mentioned it, and we will hit on it later, but that is where one's identity in Christ becomes that much more freeing, because it's not a burden. And even the most loving of people, them projecting is always going to be some form of a burden, whereas the Lord's identity is not. So in regard to that, you wrote a book of poetry. You are a poet, but you do have prose. That's what Sabotage is. It is a piece that is prose. And again, I'm the person that likes to ask the questions that seem really obvious and kind of like, well, duh. But I feel like those are the questions that you ask where you get the best answers. So my potentially obvious question is, why poetry and not completely prose? Because you are so naked and honest in a lot of your pieces. And there are some people that it's like, well, give me all the words, give me all the prose, the ands and buts and r's, put all those in there. But you have a very, it's a balance. It's a beautiful balance of both. And so why majority poetry? Why not write a book of prose that tells your story?
Right. I love this question, even though I know what you mean. But why prose? I think ultimately the short poems are super intentional, and the longer poems, which honestly to a reader it could still seem pretty short. Again, they were intentional, and those writings, they pretty much elaborate on the shortness of the poems, because in my poetry I like to play off of personification and metaphors and things of that nature. I like to make trees talk and leaves walk and things of that nature. And some people, they may not be able to read between the lines or break that down or get inside of Miesha's mind. So those readings kind of elaborate more and give the reader a more of a reflection of who I am and what those poems could potentially mean. So just like Sabotage, you'll see poems inside of Chameleon that reflect ways that I have self-sabotaged myself, or have robbed myself from different opportunities, or cancel myself out before I give someone else the opportunity to. So yeah, the writings, they are simply to reflect those short poems and give the reader an opportunity to just reflect, themselves. I mean, one day maybe I will do a book of prose, but I just wanted a bit of a balance.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. So as you speak to poems that kind of exemplify the prose, the next piece that I want you to read is Choose Your King Wisely. And that, to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but it does strike me as a way that maybe you self-sabotage, but we in general. And again, this is why it hit me so hard, because I'm like, man. But let me stop talking about it and let y'all hear. So go on.
You're good. Okay. I wanted to be loved as Christ loved the church, praised like mothers giving birth, and held like mine saving prayers for later. But my mistake was painting you as my savior. That is Choose Your King Wisely. I love this poem.
Yes, I love it too. I think that it is, like I said, when I say we, I speak of women. Yeah, like that last line just really hit home for me, because honestly, it just speaks to the idolization of a man, and that is a whole podcast within itself.
Right. Um, and this poem is actually super old, maybe like 2 years old, because like I said, 3 years in the process. But it definitely hits home on like idolizing people and even placing people or situations on pedestals where they aren't qualified for. Period. And like you said, that can be a whole nother podcast. But yeah, I love this poem.
No, I love that. It seems to be a trend that more and more people are not resigning themselves to only operating within the confines of their occupation. And this is evident in the fact that you are an educator. I, again, yes, am encouraged by the work, but I'm also encouraged by you taking a passion of your own and pursuing it. And it doesn't have a link to or it does not have a direct link to your occupation. And so I think that is just a testament. I think it's just really helpful when people understand that we are whole beings, and you can love your work, but also have these other pieces of you, these creative pieces of you that need to be worked out. So in light of that, do you see yourself writing more books? And if so, like what types of books, about what subject matter? Yeah, tell us about that.
Yes, I absolutely see myself writing more books. In fact, although I am a sixth grade math teacher, I would I would prefer to be, a literature teacher, doing English language arts. But I think, I know for a fact that there's something that God wants me to get out of this position. And while I'm in this position, I want to also make sure that I am nurturing the gift that God has given me with writing. And so Chameleon won't be my last book. I want to do audiobooks and things of that nature. I want to, this may sound crazy, but I want a book of haikus. There's so much I want to do with my writing, because for so long I have silenced myself. I've been silenced for so long. I didn't believe I was great, but it took me growing through a lot of things and unlearning self-hate, as I said before, to understand that I am great because I serve a God. I serve a king that is even greater. So with that, I have to continue taking a chance on myself. I can't continue the cycle of self-sabotaging, because what I do, the things that I write, the things that I put out, my words that I pour into other people or into my writings, is not just for me. It's for other people as well. So a lot of the things that we go through, as we know, it's not for us. And so, yeah, I just want to continue writing books, and however that looks, I'm not sure. But right now I'm writing this Chameleon book out, and I just look forward to Chameleon reaching different audiences, getting in the hands of different people who may not be poetry lovers. Because I feel like Chameleon is a book for so many different people in different ways. So that's why you have that balance of poetry and prose. But yeah, I want to continue doing this, even if writing or authoring books isn't like my occupation for the rest of my life. It's still going to be present and evident. So yeah, just want to continue growing, continue writing, and making an impact, building community.
Yes, definitely. So you spoke of going through things that is, when we go through things, it is not just for us.
Yeah.
And I think that one of your biggest examples of that is your work that is entitled Whole.
I remember feeling as if I had lost such a special part about being a woman. Finally, being properly diagnosed with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, was a relief, but echoes of grief chimed throughout my mind and body often. I was glad to know what had been causing my body to act strangely, the constant mood swings, prolonged cycles without having one. In addition, the anxiety that peekabooed in and out of my life for the past 3 to 4 years. I can also remember the doctor casually saying, based off of your ultrasound, there are tiny cysts surrounding your ovaries, so it's safe to say you have PCOS. This was followed by a lighthearted, many people with this have trouble losing weight, and infertility is also common. However, when you do choose to want to become pregnant, you have options. Well, honestly, I'll take the option that doesn't make me feel a sense of brokenness. For me, this hormonal disorder is more than just missing periods, high testosterone levels, mood swings, possible infertility, and rapid hair growth. The young woman in me who often wrote down her future children's names felt as if the list was now void. For 2 days, I cried and spoke death to my dream of becoming someone's mama one day. On day 3, I gave myself permission to feel, but also deal. I prayed and spoke to the Lord. I know you promised us fertility, but if the only thing I ever become pregnant with is a seed of purpose, a creative vision, or anything except a child, I will be satisfied with you and your will. Since then, I have found peace with the changes that my body has been experiencing over the years, internally and externally. My slim physique has brought unwanted comments and frustrations. Ultimately, this is the body I was given, so I'm dedicated to unlearning self-hate. Here are a few reminders. The woman's body is magical. Be kinder when commenting on someone's weight or mind your business. Encourage women on a regular basis and speak life to thyself. I am whole.
So I want to first start off by saying, as we've already mentioned, writing a book is hard. You know, just getting to the point of convincing yourself I can do it. Like that's harder sometimes than even writing it. And then I remember hearing someone say it's even harder to write a book when you desire to do it well. And in light of all of that, I think of the transparency that often comes with one's story. And thankfully, not all writings are transparent. They don't have to be. But when an author is telling their story, the more transparent it is, the better, I believe, the book becomes. I think that there's no other way or no other word that I can think of than to say this is transparency. This is, rawness at its best. So I want you to walk us through what led you to include this, and just like the process of going from this intimate part of yourself that you had over here outside of the book, and to say, here, I am going to allow others to have access to this piece of me that I'm still grappling with.
Yes, for sure. And honestly, it was a piece that I didn't even want in the book at all. It was a last minute, okay, I'm going to toss that in there. But me being properly diagnosed, well, formally diagnosed with PCOS, maybe like in April or something like that. And like for those 3 days, I was literally on the couch, confused, crying, the mood swings, everything that I had been experiencing for so many years. It made sense now, but it didn't make sense why it had to happen to me. But through that, and I'm still grappling with, what it is, because some people who do have PCOS, they don't look like me. They don't have a slim physique and things of that nature. Most people, they actually have a hard time losing weight. So I'm confused. Okay, so you're saying I have this, but it doesn't look like it, but I feel everything, all the symptoms of it. So I'm grappling with that. I'm grappling with the thought of, okay, infertility. No woman, well, I can speak for myself maybe, wants to hear that. And so initially I felt absolutely broken, but I had to also reflect and say to myself, again, what you go through. Yes, you have the right to feel the way that you do. You have the right to feel upset, angry, cry, all this type of stuff. But you also not only owe it to your younger self, you owe it to your current self to continue being transparent and vulnerable as you're doing throughout the rest of the book. So why, it was kind of like a why not, you know? I have been vulnerable thus far. And in addition to that, so many women may actually, well, let me rewind. So many women may not be aware of what PCOS is. And even for Black women, it's even harder to, get that proper diagnosis, because that's a whole different conversation with, people of color and, in medicine. That's a whole different conversation. But we know that it's harder to advocate for yourself sometimes when you're in a doctor's office, especially when I was there by myself, receiving what the doctor is receiving, but also trying to remember you have to do your own research as well. And you have to also trust God more than you trust, yourself right now, and what you're receiving from these doctors also. So as you can hear, a lot was going through my mind. But in this process, I'm still in the process of writing Chameleon, getting ready to publish it. And so I say, okay, you're talking about your identity in this book. You're touching base on how it is to be a woman in this society in different poems. I felt as if including this, it not only gave people access to who I am right now, but I think it showed a sense of rawness and a sense of courage and bravery to be this open about something of this nature, especially when it comes to the woman's body. And if anything, in this world, we have so many people trying to comment or, justify or anything of that nature of what a woman should do with their body, or, how, their body looks, or how they look as a woman, period. I'm going to, take the power back myself and just put it out there. If there's something that I can control, it's going to be what I put in this book. And I'm going to put this in the book. But honestly, before I actually released the book, I was convinced that I was just going to take the book down off of Amazon, take this part out, and just act like it never existed. And even after Chameleon was released, I wanted to contact every person who had the book and tell them, just bypass that, But again, I owed it to myself to continue being honest and truthful.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think the title of it speaks to all of that, because I think the title in general is a reminder, that there are pieces of us in general that maybe don't work the way we would have them to. Yeah. And yet, and still, in Christ we are whole. Yes. And so I think that was another reason why this writing hit me so hard, because someone can read it, and yes, they read about your PCOS, but they can also read about themselves and something else that they've gotten, that they've heard about themselves, whether it be a physical thing that they are dealing with, or mental, or laundry list of things. But yes, this wholeness is something that I think is just beautiful, and honestly something that I believe a lot of people will benefit from. That the inclusion of this is not in vain.
Thank you. I even included the reflection question: how do you combat feelings of brokenness, and what brings you light in your darkest moments? So for that person who may not be dabbling with something, medically, they still have that opportunity to reflect on what it is to feel broken, but to know that you're a whole. So, yeah.
So on the back end of that, I'm going to have you read your piece Woman, because that, I think, is just as strong.
We are lavender and honey dipped in robes of royalty. We are the first bite of soul food on Thanksgiving, in the morning stretch after a long night. We are the sight of relief when a crying child falls asleep. We are comfort, and when the world spoon feeds us distortation, we digest purpose and explore the parts others make us feel subconscious about. like the size of our bodies, the tone of our voices when we speak, our hair, and if it's neat. All the things that embody the nature of our existence is resistant to nonsense because our worth is God-given. Let us remind ourselves and each other of such.
Yeah, I think that is the perfect period to to yeah, all that we've been talking about in regard to the piece whole. Yeah, it's just beautiful. So I want those that are listening to know where they can find you, where they can find your book. You just recently launched a website. So this is where I want you to plug all that you're doing, but also what are your hopes for Chameleon moving forward?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to do a little plug. You can find me on www.mieshasade.com, mieshasade.com. I'm also on Instagram. It's Miesha Sade. I'm also on Twitter. It's Miesha Sade. So those are my social media handles, and those are the two platforms that I'm going to try to be very consistent with, and to continue building community and interacting with people who want to see more from me and hear more from my poetry, and to hear the backstory behind Chameleon as well. So again, Chameleon, I just want to continue diving into it, and even when I do interviews such as this, and I'm rereading poems that I've written ages ago, it puts me in a mind state of nostalgia, and it gets me back to reflecting, and it's confirmation that I'm able to do this again. And that's going to be the big part for me, is understanding that, okay, you did this. The process of publishing, it wasn't easy, but you got this. You can do this again and again and again. So that's honestly what I want to continue doing, building community through the platforms that I'm on right now, and continuously pushing Chameleon. So yeah.
Yes, that is great. I am going to have all of those things that you referenced, so the social media and your website, posted in the show notes for those that are interested. They'll have a quick way to link up with you. And before we go, I have the question that I ask people that I'm always excited to hear their answer is, what are your words to lift by? We are living in a world that is crazy. So we have to keep ourselves grounded. And I do believe that most people, we have something that we're kind of like, okay, this is what I remind myself when things just feel like they are, completely out of sorts. So what are your words to lift by?
Oh, I have a ton of words. But I would just say my words to live by is, honestly, my hope is in Jesus. There's so much going around, and when I'm in conversation with someone, um, my hope and my faith is in Jesus. That's what I literally say. And I always say that there's something I'm supposed to get out of this. So I'm going to position myself even firmer in my seat, and I'm going to remember my why. And I think that's what's going to keep me going, even in the position that I'm in right now, in the middle of this pandemic, and other things transpiring. Just remembering my why, and ensuring that I am staying close to Christ and farther from the lies of the enemy. And so all of those things are going to be key, and it's what I truthfully live by. So yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me, talk with me, kind of be transparent all over again from the book. This has been an amazing conversation, and I know that it's going to bless the listeners. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Here to Edify. New episodes drop every Wednesday and can be found wherever you listen, now also on YouTube. Thanks again, and hope to catch you listening next time.